Hello everyone, today we're going to start a small series of Forge Worlds going over how they played in the past and a little bit of lore as to where they stand then and now. Today we'll be starting with Forgeworld Agripinaa, which reminds me. Forgeworld Agripinaa, or Agripinaa, however you say it. I'm sticking with Agripinaa because it doesn't sound as derpy and silly. Like those of you who say pecan instead of pecan. Fucking bozos. Forgeworld Agripinaa is known as the Orb of a Million Scars, due to its relentless amount of conflicts with its proximity to the Eye of Terror. Additionally, it also serves as the primary manufacturing power for Cadia, and thus was very involved in the efforts of the 13th Black Crusade. Now that Cadia is more akin to a Tabaxi you just decided to pick up than a planet, Agripinaa stands alone against all the forces pouring out of the Great Rift. This consistent beating from the forces of chaos have made the forces of Agripinaa extremely skilled in defense, later portrayed in the tabletop editions past. In order to have such a mastery in defense, the Forge World would need a hefty military presence, having one of the biggest legions of Skittari and mechanized infantry compared to its peers. Some willing to protect their sacred practices and dogma, others with not so much of a choice. As we know, the Mechanicus are some heartless bastards, and the fleeing refugees of Cadia and from other sectors being raised from chaos attacks arrived in the orbit of Agripinaa with limited options to retreat to. The Forge World gave them a simple ultimatum: refuge for their forceful conversions into the legions of the Forge World, Skittari or otherwise. With these numbers, Agripinaa has and continues to be able to hold against the chaotic forces at their doorstep, or launching a counteroffensive to the heretical forges of the Dark Mechanicum. The 13th Black Crusade was definitely centered around Cadia itself, but that's not to say that Agripinaa was also not a target standing side by side with a guard to defend the Cadian Gate. The defense of Agripinaa involves several chapters such as the Blood Angels and the World Eaters fighting over the defense of the planet. It's clear that the Forge World was under siege, and further paints the massive scale of the 13th Black Crusade. During the era Indomitus, Agripinaa saw itself greatly hindered by not only the destruction of its bastion of Cadia, but the ravaging of other systems nearby that provided materials and supply to the forges, dependent on such for the continued manufacturing of the Imperium. Agripinaa would see itself attacked yet again by the forces of chaos, in particular the Death Guard, fended off due to the combined efforts of the Cadian forces dispersed from the destruction of their homes. This continues to be the fate of Agripinaa, a bullied Forge World continuously assailed and ever stalwart in the assaults of the Great Rift. From this reputation, Agripinaa and their defensive affinity was displayed on the tabletop playstyle. In 8th edition, Agripinaa had a unique Forge World canonical of the Omnissiah, the army rule at the time, named Verse of Vengeance, allowing infantry and cavalry, now known as mounted units, to roll a d6 when a model of that kind was destroyed, and on a 5+, the model can shoot or fight on death. Additionally, the Forgeworld Dogma, being known as a detachment rule today, was called Staunch Defenders, giving credence to their lore and allowing them to fire Overwatch on a 5+ roll instead of a 6, a small defensive boost to try and stop the advancement of the enemy line. With every Forge World came a unique stratagem. Agripinaa had the stratagem Fresh Converts. Wonder where they got those from. At the end of the movement phase, it allowed you to pick a Servitor unit or a Cataphron unit to pick up at the cost of CP depending on how powerful they were with an old mechanic. These selected models were removed from the field and set up as reinforcements starting at full strength. In a way, this allowed you to recycle a unit that was dying or no longer needed in the field and redeploy them back to full strength. Really spicy one here with how it serves multiple purposes. The Arcana Mechanicum of 8th edition was the Eye of Xelexum. On an Agripinaa model only, at the start of each of your shooting phases, you can select one vehicle within 18 inches of the bearer, and you can reroll wound rolls of 1 for any friendly Agripinaa unit that is targeting that vehicle for the rest of the phase. However, if this was specifically a Chaos vehicle, then you would instead reroll all failed wound rolls against it. Lastly, the Warlord trait, now known as an enhancement, specifically for Agripinaa, was Reinforced Exoskeleton, allowing your Warlord to reduce damage by 1 to a minimum of 1. It was alright, as our leaders aren't particularly putting themselves in danger, especially when we doubled down on shooting far more in the past. Moving on to 9th edition, they saw a nice touch up with their rules, giving them that defensive identity. The Dogma retained the same name of Staunch Defenders, which now saw them getting an increased AP by 1 whenever shooting something within half range, and when a unit was declared the target of a charge, the unit could hold steady or set to defend. These were mechanics that applied when you were being charged within a terrain feature with the keyword defensible. This allowed you to use it even out in the open. Basically, hold steady allows your unit to overwatch on a 5+, and set to defend doesn't allow the unit overwatch, but adds 1 to hit rolls in the next fight phase. It wasn't exactly the best rule, but it was seasoning on top of the -1 AP at half range, considering that in 8th edition, you only got the 5+ overwatch. Definitely a nice rule to play around and still defend yourself while keeping enemies at arm's length. The Arcana Mechanica model of 9th edition is still the Eye of Xelexum, allowing the Agripinaa Warlord to select a vehicle within 18 inches and grant any Agripinaa units with the core keyword or any Cataphren servitors within 6 inches of the bearer to reroll wounds against the selected vehicle. A little shoehorned considering it's only vehicles, but strong against its targets, especially since Cataphren Breachers needed a 4+ wound to score 3 damage versus 2 against vehicles. Eat your heart out, Explorer Maniple. In 9th edition, the Forgeworld Canticle would see itself turn to the Warlord trait, keeping the name Verse of Vengeance. In your command phase, you select one friendly Agripinaa core unit within 6 inches of the Warlord carrying it. Until the start of your next command phase, each time a model would die on a 4+ of a d6 roll, you are able to shoot or fight on death. Lastly, the 9th edition stratagem for Agripinaa was changed from fresh converts to indentured machines, allowing you to use this before the battle to add 1 to the toughness characteristics of a Cataphren unit, limited to 2 uses in a 2000 point game. While it's not as great as recycling and redeploying a unit, it did allow you for slightly harder units across the board, but did eat up a considerable amount of CP before the game even started. This mostly does it for the Forgeworld Agripinaa. Looking into it, I'm surprised that it doesn't get as much attention in the 13th Black Crusade. I can't imagine many people know how notable it was to Cadia during the siege and before the siege itself. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoy this little lore dive. And if you'd like to support even further, please consider donating in Patreon or Ko-Fi. We are so close to 1,000 subs, and if you are a Patreon supporter, that milestone will be complimented and celebrated with a Combat Patrol giveaway for Engine Seer and Fabricator tier supporters. That's all, everyone. See you next time. A thank you to all my patrons at the Engine Seer tiers, and a special thank you to the Fabricators at 3x01, Benjamin Pegler, Sig Lawson Jr., Dr. Jones, Nikito, Sekartor, Snoofalufugus, and Tech Priest Thorns. Check out the Twitch streams. We stream on Twitch every once in a while whenever I'm not chronically asleep or at work. We play janky sort of competitive lists and we fuck up all the rules. Twitch.tv/Omnipulous. Thanks.